Hey, what's up everyone, Thunderbob here, and tonight I am doing a review for Watch Dogs Legion. I actually beat this a couple weeks ago before I even started Cyberpunk 2077, but I felt there were enough similarities between the two that I wanted to beat both games before I reviewed them. Overall, I enjoyed both games considerably, but they both fell short of being great for different reasons. They're both games that I think fit into the Cyberpunk genre, though Watch Dogs is a little bit more of a stretch here. If I was going to compare Cyberpunk to a movie, it would be Blade Runner, a slow burn with deep characters and a really interesting world. Watch Dogs, however, would be more like the movie Hackers, not terribly deep, kind of cheesy, and not very delicate in how it handles the subject matter. With all that being said, I do like both of those movies and both of these games. These games are both graphical wonders and are both very much maligned for the terrible performance they had at release. The dystopian London they've created is quite beautiful, but becomes repetitive without a huge amount of variety between the different areas of the city. I kind of miss the first Watch Dogs game where a big chunk of the later part of the game takes place outside the city in a kind of a smaller countryside area. In contrast, each district in Cyberpunk has a very distinct character and look. The ray tracing implementation in Watch Dogs is limited to reflections, and while they look nice, I would have liked to see them implement full ray trace lighting. And while Watch Dogs is a visually stunning game at times, it can be inconsistent. I think the visual quality does not quite warrant the very low levels of performance that you sometimes receive even on very high-end systems. I've heard it said that Cyberpunk is a mile wide and an inch deep, meaning there's a ton of content and systems, but none of it's very deep or integrated together very well. There's 6 stats, a dozen skill trees, countless items, mods, upgrades. Most of them are pretty shallow and don't substantially change the way you play the game. In contrast, I think Watch Dogs Legion is an inch wide and an inch deep. There's a single tech tree which unlocks abilities of which you're limited to 2 weapons and 1 tech item at a time. You end up recruiting countless characters, but there's no advancement system in the game, no leveling, no gear other than cosmetics, no stats. The character will not change during the time you play the game. You select one of a number of playable characters at the start of the game, and from there you can literally walk down the street and scan every NPC you find, and mark them for recruitment. This gives you a short mission to convince them to join the team. The issue is that there's only so many voice actors in the game, and they tried to hide this by adjusting and modulating the pitch of these characters, but it's quite funny when 2 characters, obviously voiced by the same person, are interacting. The characters also appear to be a random combination of different clothes, faces, and voices, and are not really bespoke or curated in any way. None of them have more depth to them than a single line of text describing them. This is a doctor who has a gun and joined DedSec. This is a lawyer who has a sports car who joined DedSec. This is a barista who owns a stun gun who joined DedSec. That's the extent of the characterization for any of the recruitable playable characters. This causes issues with the stories because the characters are basically ciphers with no past, and it makes it difficult to empathize or care. Whatever character you're playing as will be the one you see during cutscenes. I think it can be a little limiting. The NPCs you interact with will end up carrying the story to a great extent, and it mostly works. There are several missions that deal with some heavy topics like the detention of immigrants, police violence, the use of private military forces against civilians, artificial intelligence, slavery, government surveillance. For each of these moments that the game gets right, though, there are others that just fall short. Imagine if the movie Hackers was trying to tell a serious story about the government rounding up immigrants and disappearing them. Overall, the story is serviceable and comparable to the previous games, but you lack any real agency in the outcome of the story, and it just sort of plays out. The gameplay is a mixed bag. The gunplay is adequate, but does not give you many options. You can select what weapon you're using, but in most cases it's limited to a pistol, assault weapon, and shotgun or anti-drone weapon. You can also select non-lethal versions of these weapons, which just magically fire electrical bullets, otherwise there's no difference. While DedSec discourages killing, no one will comment on it either way, and it appears to have no bearing on the story. You also get to hack during combat, which can do things like disable enemies, jam their weapons, set traps, or enable more stealth options. You can also play the entire game in a stealthy manner, but there's really no incentive to do so. By the end of the game, I had recruited a hitman and basically treated most levels like a shooting gallery. In this area, Cyberpunk does give you many more tools and options to enjoy the combat, in my opinion. The driving is fun, and when you get into chases, you do retain the ability to use your hacking abilities, making driving quite a joy. I would sometimes purposefully get into chases and see all the chaos that unfolds, causing vehicles to crash and go out of control. Overall, the driving and pedestrian artificial intelligence is miles ahead in Watch Dogs compared to Cyberpunk. There are also sections where you have control of a drone or a spider, and these basically amount to puzzles in order to progress. You can also use these just in normal combat, but most of the time it's just more effective to shoot enemies. These puzzle areas initially are fun diversions, but later in the game they become somewhat tedious and lengthy, and I could have actually done with fewer of these sections. There's also a few mini-games in the game that have some online leaderboards, but for the most part, they're not that much fun, and I didn't really participate in them too much. There's soccer, there's darts, and a few others littered around the city, but they don't really integrate into the story in any way. They don't really, there doesn't appear to be any incentive or reward really for playing them other than the currency that lets you unlock more cosmetic options, which I already had way more of those than I needed. You also have the option to hack drones you can actually ride on, or if you have a construction worker, which you obtain during the normal mission, you get basically one that you call on demand, and it makes a lot of the missions easier. And for gaining tech points, actually, there's these things spread out across the map, and I would usually just jump on my drone, fly to it, pick it up, and then fly away. It makes it so much quicker, and it's just a joy to fly around the city. This is actually one of the things I enjoy most about the game. In the end, I enjoyed both games. Watch Dogs is a much more polished, though shorter and more surface-level experience. It has better driving, but a less interesting setting to explore. There are far fewer missions, and most of them are less interesting, but again, far fewer bugs and issues. None of the characters, either playable or non-playable, are that memorable, but the story itself is pretty interesting. The combat is weaker, and the experience is much shorter. Cyberpunk is a much deeper and larger game, but lacks polish, with a huge number of bugs, terrible performance, and all but the most advanced systems. Even with all the bugs and performance issues, overall I actually enjoyed Cyberpunk more than Watch Dogs Legion. I still would recommend playing Watch Dogs Legion, and especially if you are not willing to put up with bugs or you're rocking an older system, I would wait on Cyberpunk in that case. It's going to be there in 6 months when they fix the majority of the current problems. But for now, Watch Dogs Legion is here for you.